a man of contradictions. Tommy wasn't your typical drug dealer. He didn't wear flashy chains or drive luxury cars. Instead, he drove a beat-up Honda Civic with a cracked windshield and lived in a one-bedroom apartment that smelled faintly of stale coffee and burnt toast. His friends called him the saint behind his back, not because he was particularly holy, but because he had an odd habit of giving away what little he earned. Whether it was slipping $5 to the homeless guy on the corner or volunteering at the local shelter every Thanksgiving, Tommy couldn't help himself. It wasn't about being generous. It was about feeling like he mattered. When Tommy first got into the business, his friends warned him repeatedly, "Never use your own supply." But before they could finish their sentence, Tommy was already lighting up a crack pipe in the dim glow of his bathroom mirror. The high hit him like a freight train, erasing any memory of the advice. For all his flaws, Tommy wasn't cruel. He just lacked foresight, a trait that would eventually seal his fate. He wasn't in the game for wealth or power. Money meant little to him beyond paying rent, buying Christmas presents for his family, and feeding his addiction. Tommy's heart wasn't cold. It was distracted by the haze of his habit. And yet, there was something undeniably tragic about a man who wanted so badly to do good, but kept sabotaging himself along the way. Choices and consequences. One crisp autumn evening, Tommy found himself sitting cross-legged on the floor of his dingy living room, counting cash from the day's sales. Outside, leaves swirled in the wind like confetti scattered across the street. He glanced at the small stack of bills, enough to cover this month's expenses, and sighed. Not bad, he muttered to himself, though deep down, he knew better than to celebrate. His phone buzzed. It was Marcus, one of his regular customers. "Hey, man, I need another 8-ball. Can you bring it over tonight?" Marcus asked, his voice slurred. Tommy hesitated. He'd already made 2 deliveries today, and the thought of venturing out again exhausted him. Still, he agreed. Business was business, after all. As he grabbed the baggie from his stash box, a pang of guilt struck him. He remembered the time Marcus had shown up to buy drugs while holding his toddler son's hand. Tommy had tried to talk him out of it then, offering him $20 instead, but Marcus had laughed it off. "You're too soft for this life," Marcus had said. Soft or not, Tommy couldn't afford to turn people away. Not when rent was due next week. Later that night, as Tommy pulled up to Marcus's apartment complex, he noticed a group of kids playing basketball under flickering streetlights. Their laughter echoed through the quiet neighborhood, a stark contrast to the grim reality lurking inside Marcus's unit. When Tommy knocked on the door, Marcus greeted him with bloodshot eyes and trembling hands. "Here," Tommy said, handing over the baggie. "Take care of yourself, all right." Marcus nodded absently, shoving the drugs into his pocket without even looking at them. Before closing the door, he mumbled, "Thanks, man." As Tommy walked back to his car, he spotted a young boy, no older than 10, sitting alone on the curb, staring blankly at the ground. Something about the kid tugged at Tommy's chest. Without thinking, he reached into his pocket and handed him a crumpled $5 bill. "Get yourself some candy or something," he said softly. The boy looked up, startled, then smiled shyly. "Thanks, mister." For a brief moment, Tommy felt a flicker of purpose. Maybe he wasn't entirely useless after all. A few days later, Tommy received a call from someone new, a woman named Elena. She claimed to be desperate, saying she needed something to numb the pain after losing her job. Tommy hesitated. He didn't know her, and dealing with strangers always carried risks. But Elena sounded genuine, her voice cracking with emotion. Against his better judgment, he agreed to meet her. They arranged to meet late at night in an abandoned parking lot near the edge of town. When Tommy arrived, Elena was waiting by a rusted-out sedan. She wore oversized sunglasses despite the darkness, and her hands trembled as she approached him. "I don't have much cash," she admitted, pulling out a wad of crumpled bills. "But I can pay you back later." Tommy studied her face, searching for signs of deceit. All he saw was desperation. Reluctantly, he handed over the product. "Just take care of yourself, okay?" Elena nodded, stuffing the baggie into her purse. Then, without warning, she leaned forward and kissed him on the cheek. "Thank you," she whispered before hurrying back to her car. It wasn't until Tommy returned home that he realized something was wrong. His stash box was missing. Panic surged through him as he frantically searched the apartment, but it was nowhere to be found. That's when it hit him. Elena hadn't been desperate. She'd been setting him up. Furious and terrified, Tommy called Marcus, demanding answers. "Did you send someone to rip me off?" he demanded. Marcus sounded genuinely confused. "What are you talking about? I haven't seen anyone new around here." Realizing he was on his own, Tommy decided to confront Elena directly. If he didn't get his stash back, he'd be in serious trouble. Not just financially, but physically. The streets didn't forgive mistakes like this. He tracked Elena down using the license plate number from her car. Late that night, armed with nothing more than adrenaline and anger, he showed up at her apartment. When she opened the door, her expression shifted from surprise to fear. "Where's my stuff?" Tommy demanded, stepping inside. Elena backed away, shaking her head. I don't know what you're talking about. You think I'm stupid?" Tommy snapped, his voice rising. "Give it back or I swear." Before he could finish, a man emerged from the shadows, pointing a gun at Tommy's chest. "Leave her alone," the man growled. Time seemed to freeze. Tommy raised his hand slowly, his mind racing. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He wasn't supposed to die over a few grams of cocaine. But as the man's finger tightened on the trigger, Tommy realized the truth. He'd been reckless, careless, and naive. His choices had led him here, and now there was no escape. The gunshot rang out, sharp and final. In the aftermath, Tommy's death sent ripples through the community. At his funeral, attended mostly by family and a handful of acquaintances, his sister read a eulogy that painted him as more than just a flawed man. "Tommy wasn't perfect," she said, choking back tears. "But he cared. Even when he couldn't save himself, he tried to help others." Among the mourners was the young boy Tommy had given money to weeks earlier. Clutching a lollipop in one hand, the boy placed a single flower on the coffin. No one noticed him slip away afterward, but the gesture spoke volumes. Tommy's story became a cautionary tale, whispered among those who knew him. Yet beneath the tragedy lay a deeper message. Kindness, however misguided, leaves a mark. Even in his darkest moments, Tommy had managed to touch lives. And perhaps, in some small way, that was enough.